Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Linda Czipo, and I'm the President and CEO of the Center for Nonprofits. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And I'm glad to welcome you to today's webinar about the release of the Centers and Council of New Jersey Grantmakers Rapid Response Survey number 3 about the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on New Jersey's nonprofit community. Again, it was our pleasure to partner with the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers on this survey, and we'll be doing a deeper dive into the results in just a moment. Center for Nonprofits, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are New Jersey's state association for the nonprofit community. Since 1982, the center has existed to strengthen New Jersey's nonprofits individually and collectively to improve the quality of life for the people of our state. Our programs include advocacy, education, professional training, information and referral, cost-saving membership programs, and much more. The center is also a member of the National Council of Nonprofits, the nation's largest network of nonprofits, over 25,000 organizations strong. The Council of Nonprofits serves as an advocate, a central coordinator, and mobilizer to help nonprofits achieve greater collective impact in local communities across the country. The good news is if you're a member of the Center for Nonprofits, you're also a member of the National Council of Nonprofits, and we appreciate all of the center members who help to make our voice and our programs even stronger. If you're not a member yet, we are running a special offer. If you join by July 31st and use the discount code SUMMER2020, you can get 10% off your dues. And we'd be happy to tell you more about the kinds of benefits and value that membership brings for you. I'd also like to encourage you to save the date, or save the dates rather. As with so many organizations, we have made the decision to bring our annual conference to a virtual platform. It was not an easy decision to make, although it was a very straightforward one. We're very proud of our conference. It has grown to 700 people. We are going to lament not seeing 700 people in person, but we're very, very excited to put together a really strong and valuable virtual event. So it will be held portions of December 2nd and 3rd. Stay tuned, and we'll be giving you more information about that in the coming weeks. On today's webinar, along with me, behind the scenes are my colleagues at the Center for Nonprofits, our Communications Director, Susan Merrill O'Connor, and our Director of Member Services, Debbie Duncan. And a little bit later on, we're going to be hearing from our good friend and former Center board member, Maria Vizcarrondo, from the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, the Council's President and CEO. So we are delighted that Maria has taken the time to join us today to present her insights about COVID-19, the crisis, and philanthropy, and some of the interesting things the Council is doing in this field. So today's agenda, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background and present some of the key survey findings. We'll then turn things over to Maria for her perspective and observations. Time permitting, we'll have some Q&A, and then we'll be wrapping up. If you have questions along the way, feel free to type them into the chat box. We will get to them as we can. If we're not able to get to anything, we will be sure to follow up afterward. Today's webinar is being recorded, so afterward you'll get the slides, you'll get the link to the recording, and a lot of other information that you will hopefully find useful. So let's dive in. First thing I like to do, since we're talking about COVID-19, is just remind you of two resources. One, of course, is the State of New Jersey's COVID-19 Information Hub, which is covid19.nj.gov, which links to basically everything you need to know about the state's response, as well as job opportunities, the reopening, the phases, the governor's executive orders, access to funding opportunities through the state, and much more. And the Center for Nonprofits, if you haven't seen it, also runs a COVID-19 page through our website, and there you can find links to a lot of the relief funds, reopening guidance, a whole slew of information. It is updated on a regular basis, so if you've not had a chance to check that out, please feel free to do so. So again, anybody who has been on our presentations knows that we like to start off with just a reminder of how important New Jersey's nonprofit community is, both from a social and quality of life perspective, because of the wealth and breadth and depth of programs that nonprofits provide, and which of course take on an added importance when we talk about crises like the one we're facing. The and that's not unusual. When in times of crisis, the importance of nonprofits is all that more apparent, and that's certainly the case now. But the other piece that we always like to remind people is the economic importance of nonprofits. 34,000 plus 501c3 organizations in New Jersey, employing almost 10% of the workforce, more than many major industries, a major purchaser of goods and services, and an economic driver in the state, and marshaling the energies and talents of millions of volunteers. So if we're talking about a healthy, strong, thriving New Jersey, we also need a healthy, strong, thriving nonprofit community. And to the extent that the nonprofit community is in peril, because organizations are at risk, or they're compromised in their ability to provide the services people need, the state is going to suffer as a result too. This survey is the third survey that we have done in partnership with the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. We started doing these back in March, when the crisis was really just starting to get underway. We did a follow-up survey in April, and this is our third. We wanted to take a regular pulse of what's going on in the nonprofit community in response to the crisis. If you completed the survey, thank you. If you spread the word to your colleagues, thank you. Obviously, the more responses we have, the better the information can be. And again, I'm so grateful to the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers for the chance to partner on this again. This survey was taken between July 9th and 15th, and we received 281 responses from nonprofits across the state. The survey report itself is up on our website. The web address is at the bottom of your screen. And again, we will send the report and the link to it after the webinar is concluded. So let's dive into what we've found. And I don't think a lot of this is going to be any great surprise, because people are seeing it and experiencing this on a daily basis. But yes, these are updated stats from what we had before in terms of the severity of the impact. Now remember, we had 281 organizations respond to this survey. Out of that 281, about 60%, 166 organizations said that they have lost money since the crisis began, to the tune of a total of $193 million. More than a quarter of our respondents said that they have furloughed or laid off staff. And the total number of positions that have been lost, at least temporarily, is over 13,000 in 80 organizations alone. So if you take a moment and extrapolate those kinds of findings across the entire nonprofit community, the results and the impact is pretty staggering. So that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind. It's probably not terribly surprising, but it's very distressing, and there are huge implications in many, many ways. The kinds of disruptions that organizations are experiencing, again, you're living all of this, and this is something that we've all been seeing. First and foremost is the consequences and impacts from canceled programs and events and services that had to be suspended. Clients and constituents and stakeholders that can't receive the services that they need or have to receive them in a different way. Challenges in delivering services if your clients don't have access to technology, or your organization doesn't have access to technology. And of course, we're seeing more and more hardships by way of reduced donations from individuals, because obviously the crisis has wreaked havoc across the board. So again, these are not terribly surprising, but again, very, very distressing. And this kind of impact is still occurring and is likely to continue over the foreseeable future. We also asked organizations, okay, what kinds of things are you doing? These can be good actions, not so good actions. They could be actions that are taken as a result of mandates put out by the government. So there's a wide range of actions here. And of course, the first and foremost is so many organizations had to cancel programs and events without being able to reschedule them. Many postponed events. Many have turned to virtual platforms, as we were just talking about with the center. Number of organizations had to suspend some programs temporarily, and of course, pivot to find new ways of working. A lot of organizations have already modified their physical space, and more are in the works trying to do that. Unfortunately, as we've talked about, close to over a quarter of respondents said they've had to lay off or cut staff or reduce staff hours, trying to find ways to navigate the financial impact. Down at the very bottom, we talk about mergers or organizational restructures. 6% of our respondents said that they have already done it. Another 5 say that they will, and then another 25-ish% have said that they might do this. That's much greater than most of the percentages that come out in our regular annual survey when times are a little bit more normal. So, wide range of actions being taken, and these are just a few. We asked, well, before I go into this, we also recognize that for many, many organizations, reopening is kind of a misnomer because services have been being provided. Many organizations have continued to provide services directly in person, and that has not stopped. Many other organizations have been working remotely, or a combination of in-person and remote, and that has not stopped. The pace is not any slower than it was before, just because you're working remotely. But we know, of course, that a big concern is when and if and how organizations will be able to resume and in-office activities or on-site activities for either their employees or their volunteers or their clients. So we did ask some information about that. And a number of organizations are still, this is not on the slide, but a number of organizations are doing a hybrid still of working remotely and having some people in at the facility, and many others are still completely working virtually. And it's worth repeating that, at least right now, in terms of the phase of the recovery, according to the state of New Jersey, the governor has said through his executive orders that if you are able to work at home or off-site, that's what you should be doing. So a lot of organizations are still in that position to do that. But we know that at some point, restrictions will be lifted, or they're being lifted gradually. So we wanted to know how prepared organizations are. And the question was pretty straightforward. If restrictions on operations were lifted immediately, would you be prepared to reopen your in-person services? And 2/3 of our respondents think that say that they're very prepared to do that right away. But almost a third of our respondents are not prepared, and there are a few different factors that are coming into play here. One is the expense or the challenges in obtaining or providing PPE, personal protective equipment, modifying the workspace. There's a lot of concern about whether the safety and comfort level with respect to resuming in-person services, safety for clients, for volunteers, for staff. So the safety issue and that comfort level is still a very, very important concern. The expense and lack of availability in some cases of PPE and cleaning supplies and services is a very, very big hurdle as well. For those of you who haven't seen it and you are interested in some extra guidance with respect to reopening when you're reaching that point, you may have seen that the Center for Nonprofits did issue back in May a going forward guide. We also had a webinar associated with that, with the release of that guide. It's on our website at njnonprofits.org. So that is free for you to download, use, and share. So please feel free to take advantage of that. We also asked a lot about the experiences that organizations have had with respect to applying for some of the government grant and loan opportunities. We also asked about the private relief funds, and we found there that about half of our respondents had applied for some of the private funds, things like the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, some of the other COVID-19 focused funds that have been launched by a number of grant makers in the state. And about half of our respondents said that they had applied for at least one of those, and about 3/4 of those that had applied were successful in getting at least something. There were, of course, since funds are not limitless, there were a number of organizations that were not successful, but that's certainly been an important pipeline of support to the community. But the other piece we wanted to know about, and this was we asked this pretty much for the first time in terms of trying to gauge success in accessing a lot of the government programs that are available. We asked about a slew of them, and we asked organizations, did you apply? Were you successful? Were you rejected? Are you waiting? Did you decide it just wasn't worth the trouble? Because we've also heard a lot of feedback about sometimes the complexity or the hoops that have to be jumped through, or the lack of clarity or consistency. So this slide is an effort to get to some of that. Now, by far the most, at this point, frequently used accessed program has been the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program. 2/3 of our respondents said they applied for that program. They were able to get approved for funding through that program, and it certainly has had its hurdles with respect to execution and changing guidance, but it really has been a very important program for nonprofits. One of the downsides, of course, is that it's not open to everybody. If you're a larger organization, you have more trouble accessing that program, although advocacy efforts are ongoing to try to make some of these programs a little more accessible to organizations of all sizes. But some of the other programs have not been utilized quite as frequently. So things like some of the other SBA programs, the Economic Disaster Loan, the Loan Advance, the Economic Development Authority Grants Program was something that there was a huge amount of interest, but it was oversubscribed pretty quickly. And there's also a lot of, I would venture to say that Paycheck Protection has gotten the lion's share of the attention. So there are other programs available, and I think attention will shift to that after Paycheck Protection expires again on August 8th. And so again, unless something happens on the federal level to reopen or another program becomes available. But this is just a interesting snapshot of how nonprofits have been able to access some of these programs. Again, a lot of advocacy has been going into making these things accessible to nonprofits, open to nonprofits. Forgivable grant loans are always much better, but not everything is forgivable. In some cases, loans can obviously be helpful as well. We asked, and we know that this crisis is long-term in nature, but we wanted to take a pulse about how organizations were feeling. So we asked, compared to May 1st, when clearly the crisis was in full swing, but it was 2 months prior to when the survey was taken. Has anything changed for you? Do you feel like your circumstances are about the same, more stable, or less stable since May 1st? And we also asked, looking ahead to September 1st, do you think anything will be different? And obviously, there's a wide array of uncertainty. These are very, very volatile times in many, many ways. So you see what people said. I mean, most of our respondents said that things are about the same, for better or worse or whatever. You know, the stability level is about the same as it was 2 months ago. Now, in some cases, that will be because they were able to get some relief funds, some loan monies, things like that. In some cases, it may be that things were precarious back in May, and they still are. So there's a lot of fluctuation here, but we wanted to kind of take a pulse there. And this is something that, as we do follow-up surveys periodically, we'll continue to ask about. Again, we asked nonprofits, what are you looking for? What kinds of help, assistance, and whatnot do you need? This has been pretty consistent across the surveys that we have done, and they fall into these buckets of funding, resources, flexibility, stability, communications, partnerships, and professional assistance. And obviously, number one on this whole list is funding. We've had respondents say, my organization is hemorrhaging, or they haven't been, because obviously with the cancellation of events or services being having to be suspended, it's been, the impact has been devastating for many organizations. So no real surprise in that respect that funding is the number one request. And it's not just more funding, although that's really key. And funding from philanthropy, funding from another common theme is, please give more out, dip into your endowment a little bit more. This is a crisis. Try to keep your partners whole. And philanthropy has been doing a lot of that here in New Jersey, and we certainly appreciate that. The other aspect related is on the government side, that's also been a huge problem, and very, very big concerns about what's going to happen in the budget. Some organizations have already been cut, and there's a widespread concern about what's going to happen in the coming weeks. Flexibility means just that. It's making sure that more general operating funds, more breathing room by way of multi-year funds, allowing organizations the flexibility to repurpose funds that perhaps were intended for something that can't be done now in light of the crisis, or in terms of government contracts, allowing the contract to be renegotiated. A lot of things in that flexibility bucket. Stability, again, we were at a time where years and years of chronic underfunding of the nonprofit community, of critical human needs, and from an equity standpoint, obviously all of these inequities and years of underfunding critical concerns are now coming home to roost. So this lack of stability is a direct result of that. If your organization was stable and in good financial health before this started, you perhaps have a better chance of weathering it a little more smoothly. Smooth is a little bit of a not exactly an appropriate way to express it in this time of extreme crisis, but basically, if you were healthy before this started, you have a better chance of getting through it on the other side. Communications, again, guidance, transparency, and communications goes two ways. And we know, of course, that nonprofits need to communicate with their funders, stakeholders, partners as well. But a lot of concern that nonprofits, especially hearing this in the context of government, that nonprofits' viewpoints are not necessarily being solicited, that nonprofits are not being sought after as equal partners that have solutions to offer. So communications is a broad bucket, but it encompasses a lot of different things. Partnerships, connections, again, that's pretty straightforward, but those kinds of frank conversations are more important than now, and also just keeping people in the loop as far as what's going on in terms of philanthropy, making sure that your nonprofit partners or nonprofits in the community understand what you are thinking, how you're approaching the crisis, what you are able to do to keep keep continuing to contribute to the causes that you were involved in prior to this. What is your stance with respect to equity? How are you altering, if applicable, your grant making processes? Again, not terribly surprising, but it takes on an added importance now. Professional assistance, training, resources, again, that's an educational component that is very, very important. And there were a lot of certainly a wide array of topics that were offered in terms of what organizations need. And this is what organizations have told us in terms of either resources, information, or training. Not surprisingly, number one on that list is fundraising and resource development, how to access the resources needed to keep going during the crisis and beyond. Improving remote operations. I think it's pretty clear for many organizations that remote operations are not going away anytime soon. And some organizations have in fact decided that this is really been going pretty well. Some organizations are going to scale back their physical plants or go completely remotely, but it is a challenge in terms of making sure that everybody's engaged, that the work is done efficiently, ways to make better use of the technology, et cetera, et cetera. So that's certainly a need. Long-term strategic changes, how to adapt, how to be deliberate and mindful as far as how to assess where your organization is headed in the programs. Still, people are looking for guidance about the government grant and loan opportunities, training about virtual events, since lots of people have had to convert to virtual. And this next one is really, really important because obviously this is a reflection of the times that we find ourselves in. Nearly half of our respondents have said they are interested in more information and resources about advancing diversity and equity in the community. And we know that the crisis at hand is it's a racial and social justice crisis. It is not just a public health crisis. And as nonprofits, we have a responsibility to advance an anti-racism agenda and work deliberately, intentionally, and integrate that goal as every part of our program so that we are it is not an ancillary thing. It is not a side thing. And many, many organizations and many, many leaders have been doing this throughout. And it's so important. But the fact that nearly half of our respondents have said that they are looking for more information, I think is a good reflection of hopefully a stronger, more intentional commitment across the sector to tackle these challenges. So we have a lot more that's in the survey, and I certainly welcome, again, encourage you to take a look at the survey itself. We'll hold questions for a little bit, but if Maria Vizcarrondo is on the line, I'm really looking forward to turning things over to her and hearing her perspective about what the philanthropic community is looking at, seeing the actions that have been taken and what kinds of steps you're looking at for the future. Maria is a very good friend of the sector, obviously, as was a nonprofit leader for many, many years. Also, former professor at Cabrini College. She's had a long and diverse and very rich career in the community. And so I was so thrilled to hear when she was appointed president and CEO of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, maybe 18 months ago-ish or so. But she's a very good friend to the center, to the sector, and to me. And Maria, if you're on, let me turn things over to you.
Okay, now you unmuted. Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that was under your control, Linda.
Yeah, I was trying. I was clicking and it wasn't working, so I apologize for that. Thanks for hanging with it. Oops.
And I was just saying, please keep that picture up because that looks a lot better than I do right now. So thank you. So thanks so much, Linda, for allowing me a chance to talk about what New Jersey's philanthropies are doing for this for the center's members at this particular point in time. And I also want to thank the nonprofits of New Jersey because you have stepped up as I would expect in ways that we probably never even imagined we could. We're especially pleased to partner with the Center for Nonprofits on your rapid response survey that gives information to our members about how to best help to serve and meet the needs of your members. And as tough as things are today, I have to say I never was prouder to be part of the philanthropic and nonprofit communities of New Jersey. The work being done in the face of unprecedented health and economic adversity is just amazing. I am proud too to have spoken out jointly with the center to speak out strongly against racism and hateful responses that our members and yours have seen all too often. And even one time is too often. So I am thrilled that the CNJG has established a racial equity task force with the goal to eliminate any structural racism that may exist within the philanthropic community. So we're looking to do our part in this battle against racism. As though navigating with the grip of the unprecedented pandemic doesn't present enough of a challenge, especially after the killing of George Floyd and others, things that over the past few weeks have really struck me to my core. And I find myself going back to tragic times that I hope would have never come back to haunt us. In particular, I think about when I was a middle school survivor during the 1967 Newark unrest, and during this time I've relived the destruction of property, looting of stores, and most horribly, the visual of National Guard taking over our neighborhoods with their imposing appearance and brutal abuse of my neighbors and treating us like enemy. It was a devastating time that is hard to explain unless you live through that experience. So in sharing that, I know that you all can feel the distress that this brings to me, both as an advocate and as a person of color. At CNJG, a big part of our effort during the pandemic is to provide a wide range of programs and services to help inform funders in their decision making, help them understand what's happening on the ground in communities across New Jersey, and to help funders keep in touch with one another and their nonprofit partners. I'm so pleased that by the steps our member foundations are taking to be flexible during this crisis, to work with their grantees and nonprofit partners in different ways, like streamlining the grant making process so nonprofits can either refocus grants or receive new funding expeditiously to provide immediate relief for those facing the most pressing situations. And to that end, we've been encouraging our members to sign onto the Council of Foundations a call for action pledge, which I urge all of you to look at when you have an opportunity on the Council of Foundation website. I think we were also going to try to put it in a chat box here if you have one available. And if you don't, please go onto our website and you will see it there. Another important thing we've tried to do during this time period is to help track philanthropy's response to the pandemic by elevating our program called Get on the Map, which is a partnership with Candid, who recently launched a specific new coronavirus map. On this map, New Jersey funders are urged to share their data with Candid so they all can see where money is going and for what purposes. This will help avoid duplication and hopefully will meet an important service by ensuring that all areas are served that need to be served. Many New Jersey grant makers, from the biggest to the smallest, launched COVID relief funds, and at CNJG, we're helping to coordinate this exemplary effort. If you go into the list of New Jersey relief and recovery funds that we have on our website, you will see the listing of I think it's over 20 funds that now are in existence. So please check that when you have an opportunity. And to help them to do good even better, we set up the COVID-19 funders virtual online go-to place where funders can go to get timely updates of the latest pandemic developments, share information about what services and help are needed, where they are needed and where, and learn best practices from each other. We are also working with a group of COVID-19 response funds to explore strategies for effecting grant making in response to the virus that avoids duplication and focuses on vulnerable communities. This was a particular lesson learned after Superstorm Sandy, and we want to make sure that there's communities that don't get left out in this process. So there's a lot of attention being given to the issue of equity of distribution of funds. I'm hearing from funders, especially small ones, how valuable it is to hear what their colleagues are doing, and in many cases to find that they're not alone in the challenges they face. The other thing that we have done is we've dusted off the disaster philanthropy playbook that CNJG helped to create after Superstorm Sandy in 2020. And we're using many of the lessons learned then to inform response and recovery with this COVID virus. I'll finish with this. New Jersey's philanthropic sector is committed to grounding its work in the Center for Disaster Philanthropy's key principle grant making. And those are as follows. Number one, resilience, to improve communities holistically and make them stronger than before the disaster. Two, to ensure that there's equity so that there's historical injustices are accounted for and investments are done well informed. Next is sustainability, to take into account a long-term view and factor in uncertainty. So as you can see with these goals, we pretty much are matching up with a lot of the concerns that survey presented. And finally, to ensure civic participation that both equips and empowers those who have been left out in the past to have influence in what happens in their communities in the future. We know our work and your work is far from being finished. I look forward to standing shoulder to shoulder with you until we meet the needs of our New Jerseyans, and that the state can one day be back to being stronger, healthier, and more thriving than ever before. Thank you.
Maria, thank you so much. I appreciate your personal insights, your perspective, and the updates as far as what the council and philanthropy are doing. We do have some time for some Q&A in the chat box. If anybody has a question for Maria or about the survey findings or anything else, feel free to put that in the chat box. And I'm not sure if we have anything yet. We will, as I said, the links in the to the resources that Maria mentioned were put in the chat box, and we will send them afterwards as well. I did put up 2 pages on the Council of New Jersey's website, which focus on their members' coronavirus response, as well as some of the New Jersey focused response funds. And we'll send the link to Candid's geographic resources as well. Let me pause a minute just to see if there's anything in the chat. And if not, then we will.
This is Debbie. Can you hear me?
Yes, Debbie.
There are several questions
Okay.
in the questions folder. One from Carly Morano. What about the FEMA grants, reimbursements against eligible costs, and 2% of Medicaid income to offset lost revenue?
That is something I would have to follow up on. I'm not quite sure where that stands and how many organizations have been faring with that. But we can certainly follow up on that and send information out after the fact.
Okay, and another, this is more of a tip. She says, we're finding some of our foundation and corporate bank grant makers are willing to have us apply for flexible grants versus program-related restricted grants to help us respond to areas of greater need. It's worth a phone call or email to ask. Others are halting their grants, and some banks are reducing their philanthropy budgets for 2021.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've certainly had great experiences with our funding partners who have been checking in to see what we need, and I've heard this from many nonprofits, not just us, but exactly to that point, talk to your partners, talk to your funders. They can't know what you need unless you tell them, and they certainly are expecting to. This is a unprecedented crisis, so people, I'm sure, this is not going to be unexpected. So it's a great point. Thank you.
So can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
So I just have a quick question. I want to make sure the question was that there's some funders that are not providing, are releasing funds outside of their restricted funds. Did I hear that?
I was hearing that it was a tip that many funders were in fact being more flexible. Debbie, did I misunderstand?
No, that's correct. You're correct, Linda. Okay, no, what I was going to add to it, just so you know, we've been having a lot of conversations with funders, and I think part of the challenge that's going on right now is, unlike other disasters, which has kind of, it's almost project oriented, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. This has been a very obviously unprecedented situation, and some funders are actually taking a quick time out to kind of decide, okay, how much money do we need to keep up for the next phase, or are we going to have to go back to the rapid response phase over again? So I just want you to know there's a lot of discussions going on right now about what to do with that. The other thing I wanted to say was, unlike other situations of this kind of disaster, what we're hearing from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy is they're recommending for foundations to sort of put all the money on the front end, because some government programs are not coming in quite at the level or in the timing that people had expected. So because of all of those kinds of situations, it may seem a little bit out of sorts, but I would recommend that you feel absolutely comfortable contacting your funders and letting them know the situation, because they do want to know that. And in fact, that's one of the reasons they were also anxious for us to partner with the center on these surveys.
Thank you, Maria. That's a very big help.
There's another question on having applied for PPL. How do I move toward the forgivable so that I don't have to repay it?
That is something you have to touch base with your lender about that. The process might be slightly different depending on lenders. And depending on your circumstance, the size of your loan and the size of your payroll and that kind of thing, and your size of your staff, you may be able to access the simplified PPP forgiveness form, but all of that has to be done with your lender, and not all lenders have their applications available yet. But in the meantime, what you can be doing is working with your bookkeeper or accountant or pardon me, to make sure that you are documenting your forgivable funds, because your forgivable expenses, because of course not all expenditures qualify for PPP loan forgiveness. So that's one of the things you can, if you have a payroll company, they often provide very helpful spreadsheets and things like that. So if your lender has not made those applications available yet, then definitely talk to them. We do have a link on our COVID-19 site to the SBA's prototype, but it all has to be done through the lender where you got your loan. In the meantime, just make sure you've got your books in shape so that you can document that you have spent the funds on the eligible purposes, and that will put you in a greater position to apply for the loan forgiveness more quickly. There's a lot more information about loan forgiveness. We link to some of it on our site, or if you want to email us, or we'll provide some links in the follow-up email and get you tapped into some of those resources.
Okay, I have another question here. It's interesting that 6% of respondents have already merged, and I'm not sure that's what the data says. I think it says they've considered merging. The hearing from those nonprofits and learning more about the decision-making process that took them there would be helpful.
We certainly, I mean, this is an area that is of growing interest for obvious reasons. Organizations are taking a very hard look at what the future holds and sustainability, and whether there are ways to restructure strategically or possibly merge. What we asked was, have you explored a merger or organizational restructure? So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's been completed, but the level of interest in it is definitely higher than it has been in recent years. And so I know that there are a number of folks in the field that are very, very interested in this. So you'll probably be hearing more about that. But it's something that we can keep in mind, either working in partnership with some others about maybe a future educational program, or try to connect organizations with some folks that have already done that. We do know, I mean, not necessarily as a result of COVID, obviously there are organizations that have already completed mergers for a variety of reasons. So if anybody's looking for those kinds of names, we might be able to facilitate a connection.
All right, kind of related to that is, do you have any additional details about the nonprofits that indicate they're likely to move to fully remote operations in the future?
Possibly. I mean, again, it would depend if somebody, we allow the survey to be anonymous. So unless somebody provided their name, which was purely optional, we won't necessarily know who they are. I have talked to some people who have said that some of it's just an economic decision. Rents are expensive, and to the extent that you can't have people reporting in anyway, or you can't have a full staff complement, it may be it may be a very straightforward thing to do. So again, we can try to follow up on that, and that's probably something that again, it's an area of extreme interest to a number of organizations. So we may be able to do a presentation, or invite somebody to do a blog or something about that.
Okay, another question is, a number of organizations, a significant number, indicated that their stability kind of remains the same, they think. So are the supports that people are seeking, are they attributable strictly to the pandemic, or are they supports that they were in need of before the pandemic, which has been exacerbated by the current situation?
My best guess is yes and yes. If you were in a better economic situation before the pandemic started, then the pandemic more likely hurt you, but not as severely as if your situation was precarious to begin with, in which case it just was made exponentially worse. There are very few organizations that are actually doing better as a result of the in the aftermath here. I mean, even if you're getting more resources, expenses are up, demand is up, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's actually a combination of situations within that stability bucket.
That's all the questions we have at this point.
Okay. I'm mindful of time. It is 2:55. Maria has a hard stop at 3, and we promised we would let people go at 3, so we want to respect that. So let me just move on with just a few other things. Center for Nonprofits is engaged in a lot of different activities to assist organizations, with the crisis. As you've seen, we've done things like launched our COVID page. We've had a number of free web offerings. We partnered on a briefing with Senator Booker about to do a deep dive with representatives from the SBA and Economic Development Authority about the government relief programs. We've done programs on stress management and mental health with our partners at NJAMA, the New Jersey Association of Mental Health and Addiction Agencies, and our former board chair, Yvette Murray. So we have a lot of those free webinars that are on our web page. We've been very, very involved in advocacy efforts to try to make sure that what's coming down the pike from DC and New Jersey is something that will actually provide relief for nonprofits. There's a huge amount needed, and to the extent that the government relief programs, especially federally, now include nonprofits as a direct result of the strong advocacy on the national level by our partners at the National Council of Nonprofits and others. So advocacy matters a lot. We've been putting a lot of information out, the reopening guide. We've had other kinds of convenings, and we are trying to be a supportive partner. We're so grateful for the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers and our chance to work alongside them, but we've also worked alongside many, many organizations, not just during the pandemic, but for many years. So certainly the best way to find out more about that is to visit our website, join our email list. Wanted to just give a little plug to ignore the dates on the slide, but we have a television program produced in partnership with Princeton Community Television, and you can find the episodes on Vimeo, and we've done segments on the census, we've done segments on nonprofits and advocacy, and we will have one featuring Yvette Murray and Keith Timko of the Support Center, another former center board member, to talk about how organizations can engage in the journey of being an anti-racist organization, and more of programming in partnership with others to amplify what's going on is certainly going to be coming. Plug from me, because I can't have a session and not talk about advocacy. If you haven't, if you're not already convinced, given everything that is going on right now, advocacy matters more than ever. Advocacy, nonpartisan voter engagement, legislative advocacy, just making sure that we are creating the environment in which nonprofits can do the work for the people that they serve, and we can advance a more equitable and just society. There is a lot that you can do in this space legally, if you don't already know, and we present about that constantly. Also stay tuned. We will be partnering with the League of Women Voters on a voter engagement webinar. So a lot more to come there, but Maria made it very clear in her comments that we need to be out there and we need to be speaking up, and this is the time to be doing it. There's so much at stake. On that note, you've heard the census has been back in the news. Not that it's been out of the news, but one of the most important things you can do if you haven't done it yet to help New Jersey is fill out the census. And number of people that you all know have been taking a lead role in trying to make sure that New Jersey has a full and fair and accurate count. And it is absolutely critical for now and for the next 10 years. So please fill out the census, make sure your relatives do, your colleagues, and your stakeholders in the community. Advocates for Children of New Jersey does a tremendous job coordinating the Census 2020 New Jersey Coalition, so be sure that you check that out. Finally, there are ways to stay in touch with us.
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Someone I think needs to be muted, but we're wrapping up here. Join the center's email list. Best way to stay in touch with what we're doing. Follow us on social media, because sometimes our updates hit social media before they hit our website, but check out our website as well. And we need to hear from you so that we are able to engage and amplify what you're doing, and that we can be supportive in your quest to make New Jersey better. We are grateful to Maria Vizcarrondo and all of our friends at the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers for being such staunch allies and partners and champions of the community. It is a joy to work with them. And I want to thank again all of you on the phone for everything that you are doing to weather the crisis, to help our communities to advance a better and stronger and just world. We can and will do this together, and we look forward to keeping the journey going. Please remember to keep in touch. We will be sending more information via email, and we thank you for joining us today, and hope that you will stay well and stay safe.